Welcome to the Sunday service of the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Northfield. My name is Bob Spear. My wife Carol and I have been members here for about 5 years. UUFN is an inclusive community that nurtures spiritual and intellectual growth and fosters ethical and social responsibility. I want to extend a warm welcome to everyone here in the sanctuary and all those gathered online today. We are mindful that we gather today with different needs. Whatever brings you here, you are invited to come as you are and take what feeds you. If you are a visitor, either in person or online, we are glad that you are with us, and we invite you to stay after the service to get acquainted. We welcome your questions and look forward to getting to know you. We have a few announcements to share before we begin the service. Sign up for the 30 Days of Love. This is an annual offering of spiritual nourishment, political grounding, and shared practices of faith and justice that run from tomorrow, Martin Luther King Jr. Day, through Valentine's Day. See the Reach newsletter for the sign-up link. Starting February 2nd, Reverend Sarah will lead a 3-session conversation on the book Beyond Welcome, Building Communities of Love. All are welcome to attend. No registration is necessary, but order your copy of the book now so you'll have it in time for our first gathering. Let Sarah know if you need a copy. Next Sunday, join us for Bring Me Back to Center, presented by Sharon Snyder Thieding. Let us explore what steps we as individuals, family members, and citizens can take toward restoring balance, harmony, and peace in the world. Again, welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Northfield.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Reverend Diana McLean, Director of Family Ministries here at the UU Fellowship of Northfield, and it is good to be with you this morning. Our opening words today are by the Reverend Christian Schmidt. Let us wake up, not just from the Sunday morning exhaustion, from the wish for a few more drowsy minutes in bed. Let us wake up to this world we live in, to its beauty and wonder, and also to its tragedy and pain. We must wake up to this reality, that not all in our world have what we do, however much or little that is. We must wake up to the idea that our wholeness, our lives, are only as complete as the lives of those around us, of those we are inextricably tied to in a great web of mutuality, of which all of us are a part. We must stay woke, in the words of our friends and colleagues involved in Black Lives Matter, working every day for racial justice in our country. Let us wake up. Let us stay awake. Let us stay woke. And now, in this time and place, let us worship together. Each Sunday, we bring the symbol of our Unitarian Universalist faith to life together. As we light our chalice, we kindle the power of community and illuminate a world that we feel called upon to serve with love. We join together in lighting our chalice with the words on the screen. Let us open our eyes to see what is beautiful. Let us open our minds to learn what is true. Let us open our hearts to love one another. I invite you to rise in body or spirit for our opening hymn, number 389, Gathered Here. We will sing it through twice. This weekend, as we celebrate the life of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., I thought it might help us understand a little more about him if we did a little experiment. I'm going to name some things that he did at different ages. If you hear me say your age or an age very close to yours, I invite you to raise your hand. When Martin Luther King Jr. was 10, do we have anybody close to age 10 with us today? I see somebody who might be under age 10. When he was 10, he sang with his church choir at the Atlanta premiere of a new movie called Gone with the Wind that I bet many of the adults here have seen. When he was just 15, he started college, 3 years younger than most people do. When he was 19, he graduated from college for the first time. He went on to get 2 more college degrees after that. When he was 24, anybody in that age range? When he was 24, he married Coretta Scott. When he was 26, he led the Montgomery bus boycott, following the model of Rosa Parks, fighting to end discrimination in public transportation. When he was 34, he wrote his famous letter from a Birmingham jail after he had been arrested. Later that same year, he gave his famous I Have a Dream speech at the March on Washington. When he was 35, he received the Nobel Peace Prize, the youngest person to do so at that point. When he was 37, here's one some of you may not know. When he was 37, he came and talked to Unitarian Universalists at our big annual meeting called General Assembly. I encourage all of you to read that speech if you get the chance. When he was only 39, he was killed. 39 is so young. That's 12 years younger than me. But in just 39 years, he said and did many important things that we still remember and celebrate today. In fact, today would have been his birthday, even though we always celebrate his holiday on a Monday. This year it happens that his actual birthday is today. Does anyone know how old he would have been today? He would have been 94 today. Do we happen to have anyone here who's 94? Can we imagine what Dr. King might have done if he had lived to 94? I don't think I can quite even wrap my brain around that. I recently heard after the death of Barbara Walters that Barbara Walters, Martin Luther King Jr., and Anne Frank were all born in the same year. And I fact-checked it, it's true, but we don't think of them that way because Barbara Walters had such a longer life. So imagining what he could have done if he'd had that kind of lifespan. While we may not be able to fully imagine that, what we can do is honor Reverend Dr. King by doing the kinds of things he would have done to keep making the world a better place for all. Sorry, I'm switching documents here. All right, we are now going to move into a time of centering, using the chalice flame to light our candles of compassion. We light our first candle as a blessing for the wider world. We offer a blessing for the people of Ukraine as they continue to be embroiled in war, and for the people of California as they struggle with severe flooding. We know too that the details of our daily lives are sacred and important. We now light a candle for all the simple joys that are sustaining us. We light another candle in honor of the sorrows and hardships that we might be carrying. More candle in honor of the joys and sorrows that we carry in our hearts, but which have not been spoken aloud this morning. And as we hold these joys and sorrows together, I offer us these words by Laura Riordan Berardi. May we find love in this place. Love in our hearts, love for the broken down, love for the lonely, love for those yet to feel whole, love for those in between, love for those out of our reach. May we find love, add love, and be love in this world. Amen.
Our reading today is from All the Great Religions of the World by Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. This reading was originally an article in Red Book magazine written in response to the questions, what evidence is there that religion has ever been or in the future could be effective in promoting peace and goodwill among men? Or do you feel that peace depends primarily on new social and political institutions? Reverend Dr. King wrote, religion is at its best always sought to promote peace and goodwill among men. This is true of all the great religions of the world. In their ethical systems, we find the love ethic standing at the center. This is true of Judaism. This is true of Christianity. This is true of Islam, Hinduism, and Buddhism. And if we go right through all the great religions of the world, we will find the central message of love and this idea that the need for peace, the need for understanding, and the need for goodwill among men. Now, the problem has been that these noble creeds and ethical insights of the great religions have not been followed by the adherents of the particular religions, and we must face the shameful fact that all too many religions people have been religious in their creeds, but not enough in their deeds. I felt all along that if religion, and this includes all religions, would take a real stand against war and go all out for peace and brotherhood, then we would be further along the way in making these into reality. I think the two are tied together. I don't think that there is peace without brotherhood, and I don't think there can be brotherhood without peace. To put it another way, I don't think there can be justice without peace. And I don't think there can be peace without justice. If religious institutions had really been true to their creeds all along for the demand for justice, the demand for peace, then we would have peace and justice. Now, even though there are a great deal of negligence, and even though the religions of the world have not done enough to inspire their followers to work passionately and unrelentingly for peace, I think that in the present and the future, religion can play a great role. If brotherhood is to become a reality, religion must somehow get into the thick of the battle for peace and reaffirm the fact that, as the Old Testament says, men must beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning forks, and nations must rise up, and nations must not rise up against each other. Neither may they study war anymore. If we just have to have a lasting peace, religion will have to do more than influence the minds of men and women and be true to their ethical insights. Now, I don't say that political institutions don't have a great role to play, and I'm not mindful of the fact that there are millions of people under political systems that would deny any claim to religion as we know it because they are basically atheistic systems. Still, I don't want to go as far to say that these systems, there cannot be any longing for peace. I firmly believe that religion, or even God, in that which concerns man ultimately. When we deal with the ultimate concerns, we are dealing with individuals who, whether they know it or not, have some form of religion. So I think that some of these situations, there can be a longing for peace. But I am sure that if the religions of the world are to bring about the peace that I am talking about and create the climate for it, then they've got to rise to the level of not fighting amongst themselves. Some of the most tragic wars in the world have been religious wars. There is a need for individual religions to realize that God has revealed himself to all religions and that there is some truth in all. And no religion can permit itself to be so arrogant that it fails to see that God has not left himself without a witness, even though it may be in another religion. Let us sing hymn 1018, Come and Go With Me, in your teal books, I believe. Please stand if you are able. We now expand our perspective to reach out to the wider world. We'll now take the morning offering. This month's share, the plate recipient is a light. A light works closely with refugees, trafficked persons, and economic migrants, 3.5 million people across the globe. UUFN has a special connection with the light. 4 of those 3.5 million that a light helps are a Ukrainian refugee family who are trying to make St. Paul their home. UUFN member Connie Ursel-Lavelle has been working on designing and purchasing a 2-bedroom apartment for them, filled with care and beautiful thrift shops finds to express our UUFN principles to be part of the web of life. Mary Dorr has also donated a bookcase for the cause, and you can see the apartment in last Sunday's Pioneer Press newspaper. Today, we will contribute financially as we are able. You may contribute by putting cash or check made out to UUFN in the offering basket on the memo line in the basket, or you may contribute online by going to our website, uunorthfield.org, and clicking on the yellow donate button. As always, thank you for giving as you are able.
I know some of the words in that reading from Reverend Dr. King may have been challenging. First, there's the outdated use of man and brotherhood to represent all people, which is, of course, simply a product of the era in which he lived. And some of you, including me sometimes, may stumble over his language about God. What I'm hoping that we can focus on together in his words today were the values that he spoke of: love, justice, and peace, values that we so obviously share. In recent surveys of Unitarian Universalists, when asked what values are central to us, one of the words chosen most often was love. I was one of the people who included that word in my reply, in fact. I don't think that most of us meant love in the romantic or soft Valentine's Day kind of way, but in a more action-oriented way. One of my favorite quotes for many years has been one from Cornel West, who said, "Justice is what love looks like in public." I think that's similar to what Reverend Dr. King meant when he spoke of a love ethic at the center of all religions, a love that moves us toward justice and peace. That kind of love asks us, in fact, I believe it demands of us, that we confront racism, homophobia, transphobia, misogyny, ableism, and any other form of discrimination. It calls upon us to refute hate speech of any kind, to resist a culture in which denigrating others is considered an acceptable behavior. It calls upon us to change a system in which there is a widening gap between the haves and the have-nots, and in which the haves hold the power and continue to use it for their own profit. It calls upon us to demand a government that strengthens democracy rather than weakening it. As I thought best about how to honor Martin Luther King Jr. this weekend, what I kept coming back to is how we Unitarian Universalists live out the love ethic that King saw present in all religions. I'm wearing a Side with Love stole, and I know there's a banner on your building with the same message. That's an action that we put into the world communally, the Side with Love campaigns, which are emphasized during the 30 days of love that were spoken about earlier. I see parallels between our response to the events of our day and our response as Unitarian Universalists to the events of King's Day and of other pivotal moments in history, other moments when we had a choice to accept injustice or to stay woke, as our opening words this morning called us to. This is not a new call. Throughout history, people like us have been asked to be awake, to act, to do our part to make the world a good place for all. This weekend, we celebrate a hero who did that for countless people, but we also celebrate his message, which was that we all have a role to play in creating a more loving, just, and peaceful world. Now, when I say we all, I really mean all. And I don't even mean just all of us who are adults. In King's time, though not under his leadership, there was a children's crusade in which Black children ages 7 to 18, think about kids you know in that age range, ages 7 to 18 from Birmingham, Alabama, engaged in a nonviolent protest against the unfairness of segregation, including the fact that their Black-only schools had far fewer resources than white schools in the same district. One of the examples I read was that a Black high school owned one typewriter, imagine typing class with one typewriter, versus the white schools having a classroom full of them so that everybody could practice typing at the same time. And that's just one small example. More than 1,000 children participated in that protest. In our own time, we have examples of children and youth living out a love ethic, including not only famous ones, I think immediately of Greta Thunberg and her work for climate justice, but there's also a young man named Levi, whose last name is escaping me at the moment, but he is a UU kid involved in climate justice. He's one of the plaintiffs in a lawsuit against the government regarding damage to our climate. Many of our own Unitarian Universalist children and youth, some on the level of Levi getting some national attention and some in our local congregations, they are engaged in various kinds of activities supporting love, justice, and peace. Each year on Martin Luther King Jr. weekend, Unitarian Universalists remember our own denomination's involvement in the civil rights movement. We often speak about the deaths of two of our own, Reverend James Reeb and Mrs. Viola Liuzzo, who were murdered in Alabama as they participated. But that's not what I'm focusing on this morning. Tomorrow, in many locations around our nation on the official Martin Luther King Jr. holiday, Unitarian Universalists will gather, many carrying Side with Love and/or Black Lives Matter banners or signs, to participate in marches honoring Reverend Dr. King, as they do every year on the day set aside to honor him. But that's not what I'm focusing on today either. Yes, marching is a relevant topic today, both historically and in terms of current events. Marching is one of the ways we turn our personal commitment to love into public action for justice. It is not, however, the only way. Today, I want to talk about what a love ethic has looked like in our history as a faith, and what it looks like for 21st century Unitarian Universalists like us. How do we, individually and together, live out our theology as boldly as King lived his? Turning our love into justice means asking ourselves, what do we stand for? Does anyone know that that's what we stand for? How do they know? What are we willing to risk? Are we willing to risk friendships or harmony with immediate or extended family by saying what is in our hearts? Are we willing to risk more than that? How much more? As Unitarian Universalists, we have plenty of role models for living a love ethic even when it's hard. Reverend Reeb and Mrs. Liuzzo are just two of many Unitarians, Universalists, pre-merger of the two denominations, and Unitarian Universalists who have done just that, who have spoken up and taken action for what they believe to be right throughout our long and rich history. In 1553, long before there was any denomination called Unitarian, Michael Servetus was burned at the stake in Geneva for writing on the errors of the Trinity, which was not even actually fully anti-Trinitarian in a strict sense, but it challenged the traditional understanding of the Trinity. And even as he burned, he refused to recant. In 1850, Theodore Parker was indicted by a federal grand jury for obstructing a federal marshal who was pursuing a fugitive slave in Reverend Parker's congregation. Even after that indictment, Reverend Parker hid fugitive slaves in his home, helped finance slave insurrections, and preached passionately against slavery. It was rumored that he kept a pistol in his pulpit should anyone come seeking that fugitive slave in church. In 1872, Susan B. Anthony and about a dozen other women were arrested for voting in a presidential election. The other women were held for $500 bail and Anthony for $1,000. She was denied a trial by jury. She lost her case and she was fined $100, which she never paid. She never stopped working for women's right to vote, though she would not live to see that right granted. When just about everyone else in the United States was crying out for our nation to enter into World War I, Reverend John Haynes Holmes stood up and said that war and Christianity, Unitarianism was a fully Christian denomination at that point, he said war and Christianity are not compatible. He risked the condemnation of his colleagues and his whole community, but he held true to his belief in pacifism. In 1939, on the brink of another world war, Reverend Waitstill Sharp and his wife Martha left their two small children with close friends from their congregation in Massachusetts and went to Prague to help refugees who were fleeing Nazi persecution. They helped hundreds escape over just a few months. Martha, who left Prague a week after her husband, avoided arrest by the Gestapo by just one day. The Sharps went on to co-found the Unitarian Service Committee, for which our flaming chalice symbol was first created, and continued their work in Europe under the USC's auspices. That's the precursor of today's Unitarian Universalist Service Committee that many of you know about already. The Sharps have been honored by Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Martyrs and Heroes Remembrance Authority in Israel, as righteous among the nations. In 1971, the year I was born, researcher and whistleblower Daniel Ellsberg gave photocopies of a classified Pentagon review of our government's involvement in Vietnam to Alaska Senator Mike Gravel, one of two Unitarian Universalists in the Senate at that time. And Senator Gravel read them into the congressional record and then took them to Beacon Press, the Unitarian Universalist publishing house, which published the Pentagon Papers. 35 other publishers had turned the manuscript down, at least partly out of fear. The Justice Department had stopped the Washington Post and the New York Times from publishing leaked excerpts. Ellsberg and Gravel's stories read like something out of a spy novel or a Hollywood thriller. Days after the publication of the full text by Beacon Press, FBI agents went to the Unitarian Universalist Association's bank and asked for UUA financial records. The UUA and Senator Gravel sued the government. The case ultimately went to the Supreme Court, but they lost. In his dissenting opinion, Justice William O. Douglas said it was not Beacon Press who broke the law, but our government. There are many more recent and ongoing examples of us taking principled stands as a faith community. Every year at our General Assembly, we participate in an act of witness. We've marched in pride parades, walked to the Ohio River in Louisville, Kentucky to protest environmental damage, accompanied Native Americans in Cleveland as they protested the racist Cleveland Indians mascot, stood on the side of love with immigrant families, and held a candlelight vigil outside Sheriff Joe Arpaio's Tent City Jail in Arizona. I know that members of this congregation and others in our area work on a wide range of social change efforts, from reproductive justice to LGBTQIA+ justice, to climate change, to hunger, to homelessness, and more. We give away money, we donate time, we donate bookcases, and we show up in solidarity when it's called for. We have much to be proud of as a people. And of course, we also have opportunities to contemplate why sometimes we didn't, or more of us didn't, show up. Sometimes it's an intentional choice, as it was for me when I was the mother of a toddler and I wanted to join in a protest for a cause I was committed to, but I recognized that my first duty was to my young son, and that because of that responsibility, I couldn't risk arrest for civil disobedience. It's okay to make those choices. But sometimes it's either fear, like it was for the publishers who turned away the Pentagon Papers, or maybe it's a sense of not being able to make a difference that keeps us from living out our love ethic. And sometimes we just think it's not our fight. 52 years ago, there was a seeming unity around the need for us to align with the civil rights movement. Reverend Reeb and Mrs. Liuzzo were among about 500 Unitarian Universalists who went to Selma and Montgomery. Nearly 1/5 of all Unitarian Universalist ministers went. One congregation informed their minister that he was going and gave him the bus ticket to get there. But that wasn't always the case. It's possible, maybe even common, for Unitarian Universalists to find ourselves as individuals or as communities on what appear to be opposite sides of an issue. While Reverend Theodore Parker was hiding fugitive slaves, many Unitarians, both in Boston and in the South, many of whom owned enslaved people or profited from industries dependent upon slavery, supported the Fugitive Slave Act. While John Haynes Holmes didn't lose his pulpit for preaching pacifism, 9 of the 15 openly pacifist Unitarian clergy during World War I did lose their pulpits. Still today, many of us are pacifists while others serve in the military. At General Assembly in 2014, Reverend Sarah Lammert of the UUA intentionally invited the Unitarian Universalist clergy serving as chaplains in our armed forces to be a part of the Service of the Living Tradition. It's an important service that happens every year at GA honoring religious professionals. The sermon was delivered by Reverend Rebecca Montgomery, an Army Reserve chaplain who has served in Afghanistan. In a denomination where we haven't always excelled and still do not excel at welcoming military service members and their families into our churches, that was a risk. Imagine how it would feel if the thing you felt called to work for, whatever that is, the thing that you're most passionate about, imagine if that was not fully supported by your faith community. Imagine if to do what you believed was right, you had to act alone or with strangers rather than in a group that simply extended your collective comfort zone a little further. And even if you're prepared to act with or without support, where do you start? There is so much work to be done in the world, so many places that we can show up for love and justice. Each of us has limited resources of time and energy. How do we choose where to invest those treasures? I think the answer is that we listen, not only to facts and news reports, though those are important, not only to the heartfelt cries from those who are suffering and want us to act in solidarity with them, but also to our own hearts and spirits. The first time I ever marched in a protest, it wasn't anything sensational, not a Selma or a Ferguson or even a local Pride Parade or Martin Luther King Jr. Day event. As a college freshman at the University of Minnesota in Minneapolis, I joined a protest against the demolition of Memorial Stadium, the stadium that had been built as a memorial to those who had served in the First World War with almost exclusively donated money. Even though we lost eventually and that stadium no longer stands, we knew we had tried, and that meant something to us. And we got a taste of what it feels like to literally take a stand for our convictions. I was 17 when I did that. I have to tell you, what I learned was that it's kind of addictive. It feels powerful acting in solidarity with others, working for change. My parents, as far as I know, have never participated in a literal march, despite being college students in the 1960s. But in 2014, when same-sex marriage was briefly legalized in Michigan before being outlawed again until the Supreme Court made marriage equality the law of the land, my parents put on their bright yellow, then they were called Standing on the Side of Love until we recognized the ableism in that language, t-shirts, so this color, and they went to the courthouse to be witnesses, to be allies. They knew one of the couples getting married that day, and their minister was one of the officiants. But they didn't leave after their friends were married. They stayed, and they joyfully witnessed several other marriage ceremonies. Their spirits called them to be in that place at that time. It felt so significant to them, in fact, that my mom and dad put a rainbow stole that my mom had just finished but not yet given to me. I was in my internship then. My mom had dad put that in his backpack just so it would be in the room on that historic day. Dad's comment about the day each time he told the story was, the joy in that room was palpable. He choked up every time he said that, and he told the story often. That's living a love ethic. The issue your spirit calls you to act on may be local or global, personal or political. It may call you to a moment of witness or to a lifetime of service. You may respond to that call alone or in beloved community or with strangers who become allies and maybe friends. It may happen in Selma, in Washington, in Ferguson, in Denver, in Minneapolis, in Northfield. It may look like marching or letter writing or singing or praying or preaching or participating in a silent vigil. What I know about it is this: because we are a covenanted community, whether we agree or disagree about exactly how each of us is called to live out a love ethic, we travel the larger path of love and justice together. That is how we live this faith of ours. That is how we Unitarian Universalists can respond to Reverend Dr. King's call for love, justice, and peace, a call which still rings out today and still is not entirely fulfilled. May we answer that call in whatever ways we can, according to our own love ethic. Amen, and blessed be. I invite you to rise in body or spirit and join in hymn 95, There Is More Love. As we prepare to leave our time of shared worship, may we remember to celebrate the prophetic King as well as the dreamer, the King who called us to action as well as the one who set a vision before us. May we remember that the best tribute to him is to act for love and justice in our own time, rather than merely remembering and honoring his actions. May that be our practice and our prayer. For those of you in the sanctuary, I invite you to place your hands over your heart or hold the hand of a neighbor or whatever is comfortable for you as we sing our final blessing, number 123, Spirit of Life.
Please join me as we extinguish our chalice. You will see the words on the screen. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Go in peace.
I'll make sure that we're not live in the sanctuary. Hey, Paul. All right, we'll just hope that my voice is not echoing there. Hi, all. How are you?
Hi.